Welcome everyone. I'm Sam Maggi, culinary mentor and chef with Basics Market. Today we're making a delicious pear cake. It's baked right in a skillet. For this recipe, we're using our own local organic Wendelling's eggs raised and hatched just minutes from our markets. Subscribe to our free online newsletter for the story of our hens and eggs. It's a fascinating tale. If you have any questions as we go along with this class, just type them into the question Q&A box. Recipes for this class are available on our Basics Market website and in our markets. Let's get started. Let's see, to start this, of course, you're going to need some pears. And pears are prolific around here, Oregon. 95% of all the pears sold in the United States are grown in California, Oregon, and Washington, so all along the West Coast. So we have lots of great local pears, and I have a few varieties here that I'm just using a mixture of Anjou, Comise, and Boss. So pears are interesting because they don't ripen on the tree. They ripen from the inside out after they're picked. So they're a pretty good shelf life. So to start this, you're going to make a pear sauce. And it's really like, think of it like applesauce. It's more like a puree kind of thing. Not necessarily a runny sauce. But this will help with take the place of part of the butter content. So it actually makes for a little bit of a lighter cake, but also it gets that pear flavor all throughout the cake. So we're going to be using pears for the pear sauce, and then we're going to reserve some pears also to put on top of the cake. So remember that. And it's always a good idea to read all through your recipe first, because you might, sometimes we miss steps like this where we're reserving some ingredients, and you can, I have lots of personal experiences where I just like to look at the ingredients and I'm like, oh, I know what's going on, and then I'm like, ooh. So always good to read through the recipe first, and we have a beautiful recipe to look at here, and we do have these lovely recipe cards in our markets that you can pick up for free, and then also the recipe is of course on the website. With many other recipes. So let's really get started here. So I've started dicing up a pear I've diced one pear for the sauce, and I've got 2 to go. So I'm going to show a couple methods of coring the pear. So pears were originally, they originated in China and then quickly moved to southeastern Europe, where the Greeks and the Romans propagated them, and the Romans created new varieties of pears, and I think they got up to something like 50 varieties, and nowadays there's 3,000 varieties of pears, and they're grown all over the world. China is the largest producer of pears in the world. So you can see I've peeled the pear, I've gotten the skin off. And so one method, and I do this a lot with apples and pears, and apples and pears are both members of the rose family, by the way, which I just learned that. I thought that was pretty cool. So what I do here is I'm just going right next to the core. And I like to do this with apples as well. I'll just cut it right alongside the core. And we do have a video on coring pears on our website. We have some little skills videos, and it shows some things like this. And I think I showed these 2 methods there as well of coring the pear. But this is pretty neat because you get this core right out like that. And then you have all this material here to dice up. And from here, I'll just kind of go along. And we were looking for a really small dice with this, with a 1/4 inch dice. So you want to make some thin slices. okay, kind of thin slices like this. And then we can stack those slices and cut lengthwise, and then cut right across, and we get the little dice. And so what I'm going to do to begin is I'm just going to put all 3 dice pairs into a bowl, and then we can look at what a third of that looks like, because it's going to vary, you know, with the kind of pear, the size of the pear, and that sort of thing. So a third would, you know, it's not always going to be an equal measurement, but it will always work, and it will always taste great. This is a really delicious cake. It's a nice cake for a coffee cake or a dessert cake. You can dress it up with like some fancy whipped cream would be good on it. Or just as is really lovely, and it's unique in that you're cooking it right in a skillet, and the skillet gives it a really great sort of outer layer, a little bit crispy. All right, so there's that one. So the other method is going to be cutting it straight down the middle. It looks like we have a question.
What type of pear do you use for this?
You can use any, the question is, does it matter what type of pear you use? And you can use any type of pear. As I mentioned, I'm using 3 varieties today, and these are the most common varieties you'll find in the markets, which is the Anjou, Conis, and I lost it, but Anjou, Conis, and another one. But I have 3 types, 3 kinds of pears. I'm more going by color here, I guess. I have the golden, the green, and the red. So you can, you know, if you want a lot of pear, go for a larger pear like this guy. And then if you know, if you want some variety, these little guys are a little firmer. But any pear will do. So this one I'm going to go ahead and cut right down the center. And then with this method, you're exposing the core here, and then you just need like a teaspoon measure, and you can pop the little seed pack right out. And then you can get the stem out with a small knife. A paring knife is good for this. And then you can take that right out. So this method is especially good for when you're doing, say, like poached pears, where you put some pears in a syrup or a wine or something and bake them. It's a really lovely way to eat a pear. And this is a kind of a nice way to do that, where you want to keep the pear more intact. Now, this one, I'm going to peel. I could have and should have peeled it first, maybe, although this is pretty easy peeling because I have a little handle inside. So maybe that's a good way to do it. Huh? Always learning something new. Okay, so then you've got your half a pear, and then you can just do your thin slices across, and then stack them and dice them. We have a lot of pear orchards in Oregon, and some of them are quite old. A pear tree can live up to 100 years or more. So when you're stacking fruit or vegetables like this to dice, you don't want to go too high because you don't want them to slip around a lot. So just 2 or 3 pieces is usually a good measure. Yes, we have another question.
How many cups of diced pears, since they're different sizes, do you estimate you end up with?
Yeah, so that is what I'm going to do. What I like to do with this recipe, since it's just sort of it's kind of abstract, right? And it's just saying use a third of your total. So that's why I'm putting it all in a bowl, and then I'm going to go ahead and measure how much I have. And so I'm going to guess it seems to usually average about 4 cups. And then so I'll take like a cup and a third out, and then use that for my puree. All right, so again, we have the half here. Use your little teaspoon deal and pop out the seed pack, and then you can get this little stem, or the top end there, and then the stem end. Get the core out, and it's ready to go. So both of those methods are great. Great way to get into the pear, and it's just kind of what you're comfortable with, and again, what you're doing with it. Like for something where you want that whole half, whether you're poaching or maybe you're canning pears, is a great way to preserve pears. Pears are great for canning and drying, and actually, pears have been were eaten by prehistoric people. They're really one of those old fruits that have been around, and you can do a lot with them. This cake really showcases the pear nicely, and pear season for us, in which, as I mentioned, is about everyone, because we grow so many pears on the west coast here, is around October through November, and then they do hold up really nicely. Okay, so there we have our bulk of pear, and I've got a little saucepan here, and I have a little bit of water, and this could also be apple juice or pear juice or whatever you like, some sort of liquid. Water is fine, and that's in case the pear is a little dry. You can add a little liquid, and then that juices it up and helps facilitate the cooking down. And again, you want to think of this as kind of like an applesauce. But it's a pear sauce, right? So here's 1 cup. There's 2 cups. And let's see, what did I say? 4 cups, right? There's 3 cups. And there's 4 cups. So that's pretty average. I've found every time I do this recipe, and I do usually use a kind of a variety of pears as far as the sizes go. So for that, and again, this doesn't have to be exact, but you just want about 1/3 of that. So there's 1 cup, and then 1/3 of a cup or so, and then that's going to be our sauce. So I have this saucepan on medium heat, and these are fairly dry. I have lemon juice, so we're going to add the teaspoon of lemon juice to that, and that helps get them cooking. And then once they warm up and start to sizzle a little bit, I'll probably add a little bit of water, because these are fairly dry pears. Okay, so this we're going to set aside, and if you have some lemon juice, you'll have a lemon open. You go ahead and squirt some lemon juice over these, and it will help keep them from browning. But I'm just going to set those aside for now, and then we'll get into the cake itself, the base, right? So for this recipe, you'll want a nice mixing bowl, and we're going to go ahead and cream some butter and sugar, which is often how we start a cake or cookies or things like of this nature, right? So we're going to put our butter, and I have this lovely Lulabelle's unsalted butter, and this is a brand that Basics produces with our own organic milk. Lulabelle's milk is a really great milk, and from it comes cheese, which we make, as well as this butter. And this butter is excellent. A quality butter can make a big difference in a cake or just in cooking in general. And this is really good stuff, and it's fresh, local. And so we're doing, this is a real good local for Oregon sort of cake. For our valley here, the Willamette Valley, we've got our pears, we've got our eggs, everything's from right around here. And that's always a satisfying way to cook, right? When you're using stuff that's just in your environment. All right, so these are starting to sizzle it. I'm going to add a little bit of water, and I have a potato masher here. And as these soften up, I'm just going to whack them around a little bit and mash them up. Meanwhile, we have 6 tablespoons of butter. Regular cube of butter is 8 tablespoons, so we had 2 left over. And then I have 1.5 cups of granulated sugar, which is just regular old sugar, right? And so to cream the butter and sugar, I'm going to put a little bit of the sugar in there to start, and I'm going to go ahead and cream it up with this guy here. And so I'm starting out kind of slow and working in there and trying to have it not jump out into my face. Yes, a question.
Does it make any difference if the butter is room temperature or just cold temperature?
Oh, yes, thank you. The question is, does it make a difference if the butter is room temperature or just cold? And yes, you want your butter room temperature for something like this. It will, it'll blend a lot easier and yeah, be less likely to jump out at you. And then the same eggs, in a recipe like this, you want to leave your eggs out a little bit and get them to room temperature. And just on a molecular level, they're going to bind better with your other ingredients. So now I'm going to continue to add the sugar. Just going to go in kind of slow. And if you have a nice big mixing bowl, that's best for something like this. That way it doesn't splash all over the place. And you just want to do this until it gets a little bit, it'll get nice and creamy. And there'll be a point when all that butter and sugar are all mixed together. And it's usually going to take about 4 minutes to see how we can do here. And of course, you can do this in a KitchenAid if you have a stand mixer. This is a good use for the stand mixer. And I'm going to go ahead and do the twisted there and continue to mash up my pear sauce. So create. You can see it's coming along. I'm going to add a little more water. And you just want it to get nice and fluffy. And get all those chunks worked out. Yes, we have another question. All right, the question is, can you use melted butter? And I am going to say no. And I don't think you'll get the same consistency with the melted butter. And I think it might react with the sugar differently. Because really you're looking for this sort of creamy texture. And the melted butter is not going to do that for you. So I would say no to the melted butter. So, because you really want this sort of fluff. And you see how it's getting a nice fluffy light texture. And that's where we want it. Now I can pick up the heat a little bit. because nothing's going to be flying around too much. Okay. So that's pretty good. And you can see we have that nice creamy texture there. So now we can drop our eggs in there one at a time. A good way to crack an egg is just on a flat surface, and that'll give you your cleanest crack across. And then you always want to drop an egg into another bowl as well. And this is just so you can see what's going on. You know, make sure that there's no weird stuff in your egg. And also this is just a nice way when you're working on a dish, a recipe like this. You have a control, and you're not going to get any shell. Also, if you had any pieces of shell, you could get those out at this point and stuff. So it's just a nice method. So we're going to add that one egg, and then go ahead and work that in. And then we have another egg, same deal. You just want to go flat on the flat surface, crack it into a bowl, look for egg remnants. Now, if a shell did go into, let's say, you know, sometimes you do get a shell fragment falls into your egg like that. A great way to get that out is actually you just use the shell half, and then that shell will be, it's almost like it's magnetically drawn to the larger piece of shell, and it'll pop right on there, and you can fish it out easily that way. And oh, and there's the sauce is happening, and my producer is like, "You're burning the sauce, man." So what I like a nice caramelized sauce personally, so I'm letting it get there. So we got a nice caramelized pear sauce happening. Yeah, good. And you could, of course, you know, at home, and maybe some of you are cooking along with me, which is great. You can, of course, do this step ahead of time and have it all done. You don't want your pears to get too brown, right? Okay, so that's looking good. I think we're kind of there with our sauce. Now that's looking really yummy, right? And again, flat, pop, and this is the third egg, and we have a question. Yes.
Why do we put one in at a time?
Oh, okay. The question is why put one egg in at a time? And just gonna wet this real quick. The reason to put one egg in at a time is you really want that egg to be worked into the sugar and the butter, and it just allows everything to all that egg to get totally worked in, and you're not overwhelming your cream of sugar and butter by putting all those eggs in it at once. You it would just take longer in the end to get all those in there, and you might have some strand of egg that got missed. This way it's all mixed in there and ready to go. Okay, so there's our lovely caramelized pear sauce. You know, that's that. Now I can call this a caramelized pear cake. That's just the way I wanted it. Okay, now so now we've got our cream of eggs, sugar, and butter, right? And now we're going to go ahead and add the pear sauce. So, you know, we'll just pop that in there. I'm going to use a spatula, and that can go right in. And low speed. Let that in. right, so that's in. And now we have some almond extract. And this is a really neat part of this recipe, the almond extract. It really gives it a beautiful almondy essence. So almond extract comes in a little bottle, and it really is just that. It's like the essence of the almond. And we really like it in this. It almost gives it like that marzipan kind of flavor. If you've ever had those little marzipan treats, something like that. So we're going to go ahead and throw that in there. Now, if you're not a big fan of the almond flavor, you can use vanilla, and vanilla would be delicious as well. And you could even add a little vanilla in addition to the almond extract. That would be just fine. Okay, let us see where we're at now. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to measure out our flour, which I have measured the flour here. We have 2 cups of flour here. And then we have our baking powder and our salt. So I'm going to go ahead and just give those a little whisk and get all that evenly mixed. And this recipe also calls for yogurt. And yogurt is a nice addition to baking. In one thing it does is it actually reacts with the baking soda, which is the majority of the baking powder is baking soda. Baking powder is cream of tartar and baking soda. But the yogurt reacts with the baking soda, and it actually gives some rise to a baked dish, as well as giving it a lovely tender texture, retaining moisture, and also it has a nice tangy flavor. So it's a good counterpart to the really kind of sweetness of the pear. Then you get a little tang from the yogurt, which is nice. So what we're going to do is we have the yogurt here, and this is 3/4 of a cup of yogurt. And we're going to alternate with the flour and the yogurt. And again, just like with adding the eggs one at a time, we're just adding a little bit at a time. And that's just because you're kind of building this, and you're building this beautiful cake, and you just want everything to be nicely mixed. And so along those lines, I'm also going to go ahead and use my spatula to clean up the sides of my bowl and just get everything in there, make sure everything's going in there. All right, so let's go ahead. We want to start and finish with the flour. So I'm thinking probably three goes with the flour and 2 goes with the yogurt, something like that. So you just want that flour to all get moistened, get in there. We can add a little bit of yogurt. We add half the yogurt. And then another 1/3 of the flour. Okay, and then another half of the yogurt. That's good. And just, I want to make sure to get all that nice yogurt in there. So I'm going to use the spatula to really clean that out. And again, scrape down the sides of the bowl, get everything in there. You have a question? Yes.
Can you use sour cream instead of yogurt, and can you specify the type of yogurt?
Yeah, yes, the questions are, can you use sour cream instead of yogurt? And can we specify the type of yogurt? So in this case, it's a low-fat yogurt. But really, you could use any kind of yogurt. It'll just change your nutritionals a little bit. And you could use sour cream, sure. Often, I find I'll substitute yogurt for sour cream sometimes, if that's all I got, like even for like tacos or something like that. Greek yogurt is a great substitute for sour cream. And sure, vice versa, sour cream can be a good substitute for the yogurt. You might get a little bit of a denser cake that way, but it'll be tasty. I mean, we have a recipe and you can look it up on our website, or if you haven't seen it already, for a sour cream cardamom cake. And that uses sour cream. And you could substitute yogurt into that cake and see what that's like. But yeah, sour cream is really nice in a cake. Good. So now we're going to finish with the flour. Now I just want to get all that dry stuff wet. And all that nice pear sauce, pear puree, whatever you'd like to call it, is in there and well mixed in. And so all that beautiful pear flavor is all throughout our cake batter. So there it is. It already looks good, and I guess I'm really hungry. I'll eat it just like this. Okay, so I've got the batter here, and now let's go ahead and a note on the recipe is don't overmix. So, we want to stop right when all the flour is moistened, and then I just kind of I went around the bottom and the sides to make sure that there isn't any dry spots, and so it's ready to go. So now I have my skillet, and this you can use a 10 or 12-inch skillet. This is a 12-inch skillet, and then it'll just be a little bit taller or shallower, what have you. But any skillet will do that you can fit the batter in, right? So, and you could also use like a pie plate, will work fine, or just a cake pan if you don't have a skillet. But again, there are certain properties to baking in a skillet which are really nice, where the skillet retains heat, it gets nice and hot, and you get this beautiful kind of crust on the outside of this cake. So I had a teaspoon of neutral oil, which is just like a canola oil, sunflower oil, something like that, something that doesn't carry a lot of flavor with it. Like an olive oil is not a neutral oil, because it has that real specific and lovely taste. But here we just want the oil to keep the cake from sticking and not add any flavor to the cake, right? Okay, so I've prepared the pan by putting the oil around there. And now we're going to go ahead and just dump the batter in the pan there. All right. And I can smell pears and I can smell almonds. It's like I'm walking through an orchard in Oregon. All right. Yes, another question.
This is an interesting one. Can I use parchment paper instead of using oil in the pan?
Okay, so there's a question about using parchment paper instead of oil in the pan, and I would say you could. I think you'd be all right. You want to cut a circle out and put it in there. I'd be a little concerned about the sides. Yet, if you've got a well-seasoned cast iron, you probably won't have any trouble, because if you use cast iron and are familiar with it, you know that it almost has like a non-stick property, where if it's well seasoned, meaning it's been used and oiled often, it has that oil in it, and it's sometimes tough to get stuff to stick. So you'd probably be okay. And then, and you could always just kind of run a spatula around the side to make sure it's not sticking. when you take it out of the oven. And this cake does tend to come away from the sides a little bit. So you know what, give it a go. I think you'd be all right. So the last couple of steps, we've got our other 2/3 of the, and we're going to go ahead and just put that all over the top. And you can kind of press that in there as well. And what's going to happen as this cake cooks, bakes, it's going to come right up around this pear. And also some will be exposed. And it makes another question. Yes.
One of our very observant folks noticed that we should have put the pear into the other third of the pear into the batter. As we went along, or?
I did. That's the sauce.
Okay.
That's
I
the
just wanted to clarify.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you. Yeah. Someone was concerned about that. The third of the diced pear into the thing, and I think I followed the directions. But yeah, the third of the pear is this third here, the puree, and that's in the batter. And then the other 2/3 were fold in half of the remaining, spoon the batter into. Oh, you're right. Okay, I was thinking also, I was like, man, this is a lot on top. So thank you. Thank you, whoever told us that. So you want to put 2/3 of another third into the batter, and then, oh, I'm so embarrassed. And then you have your topping. So thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, I was like, man, these must have been bigger pears or something. Sometimes I get ahead of myself, most of the time. Okay, so great. Thank you so much. That saved the day for our lovely pear cake. Now, the other thing is some of this sanding sugar, sometimes called, or sparkling sugar. And this stuff's really neat to put on baked goods, cookies or cakes and things. And it'll give you a nice crunchy texture, and also it looks really neat. And so you have a couple tablespoons here, and you're just going to sprinkle that all over the top. And boy, that is a good save. Thank you so much for pointing that out. So a note to self, you put the puree in there, mix it, and then after the batter is done, you put another third of the pears and put those into your batter, and then you top with a third of the pears. All right. Glad it's all going to work out. Now, now this goes in your oven, and so the first thing, of course, you would have done is, and hopefully did if you're cooking along here, is you preheated your oven to 375 degrees, and that's where this is going to bake at. So I'm going to go ahead and pop this in the oven, and it will cook for about 45, 50 minutes. And to test it, you can use like a toothpick, pop it in there, and when it comes out clean, it's ready to go. And when it's sort of firm and then golden brown on top. So see you in 50 minutes. No, just kidding. I have a trick. Yes, another question.
Can you use almond flour?
Ooh, the question is, can you use almond flour? Well, let me grab something. So 50 minutes later, here we go. Almond flour, you could use almond flour, and almond flour is, I do dabble with almond flour, and alternative flours that are quite interesting. And one of my kids is gluten intolerant, so lately I've been playing around over the last few years a lot with different flours, and almond flour is really neat because it has so much nutrition, right? It's actually it's a nut,
so you get all the protein and all those good minerals and stuff. It is a little denser. So you often with baked goods, it'll be a little denser, but it's not really a problem, you know, and it can be quite lovely to have that texture. And I think with this cake, because we're adding the almond extract, and that almond flavor really goes so nicely with the pears. I think that would be a really great match. Or maybe, you know, even a mixture of almond flour and maybe some other alternative flour, or even I think this cake would do fine like with a 1-to-1, you know, gluten-free flour. It would turn out really similar to how it turns out with the regular flour, because the nature of this cake is really it's relying on the eggs and then the yogurt and all that, and so you're getting a lovely texture from that. So here it is finished. This was 15 minutes in the oven, and you can see how it has that lovely color. And to finish, and you can see the sugar all sparkly on there. So we're going to go ahead and cut it, or let's dust it with a little powdered sugar too. Yes, another question.
Just wanted to confirm the oven temperature at 350.
375 is the oven temperature for this. You have a different. There's yeah, on the recipes that I have in front of me, it says 375, and yeah, on the card it's 375. So
we will fix the web version.
So the web version says 350, but I've always baked this at 375. Not the end of the world. If you bake it at 350, it'll just take a little bit longer. What the 375 will do for it, though, it'll give you this kind of crust right off the bat, which is nice. And then you can see how the batter rose up and covered some of those pears, that 1/3 that is on top there. And then there's the rest in the batter, right? So I have a little bit of powdered sugar here. So this cake, you get to use 3 kinds of sugar, right? You have the granulated sugar in there, you've got the sparkling or sanding sugar on top, and then you have the powdered sugar, which you can dust. And to dust with powdered sugar, this is a really kind of fundamental, or I say rudimentary way to do it, but like this little just like a sieve like this works pretty nice, and you can get a good dusting of your powdered sugar on there. And that looks like enough to me. And then a whipped cream would be really nice on this cake, I think. And then we're going to just go ahead and slice it right in the pan. And you can slice it any way you like it. I'm gonna go for some. I'm just cutting. I would cut this. This will be 12 pieces, each pattern into 3. But you can see it is quite nice, right? It looks good. You got the pear throughout. On this one, it looks like I remembered to put the pear in the batter. I might not be able to sleep tonight because of that, but you know, here we go. So, and you could use a fancy thing like this to get it as well. And that's nice. Okay, so let's try this. Fantastic. Really nice. That pear and almond interplay is always lovely and delicious. Just a great cake. It's a really good like coffee cake or tea cake, or you could dress it up any way you like. And, it's a good solid cake you could take to pack it in a picnic and you'd be good to go. Just delicious. Yes, another question.
Somebody would like to see it really up close to the whole.
Oh, yeah, so the question is, can we get this closer to the camera? And yeah, I could do, let's see, I can do like this, and you can see the way up, and way out, and maybe a side view like that. And then we can go, where's this camera? I don't know, but and then I can bring the whole thing up as well. Yes, another question.
Someone wanted to confirm, could they use apples instead of pears?
Oh, yeah. So that's a great question. Someone is asking if they can use apples. And as I mentioned before, apples and pears are both in the rose family. And yeah, you can use any of the, I don't know about rose hips or something like that, maybe not, but apples, yeah. Apples would be great in this, and or even Asian pears, another, the in-between kind of fruit, would work really well with this. Yes, another question.
If you use apples, would you recommend applesauce rather than pear sauce?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and if you're using apples, go ahead and, do the same thing, make a little applesauce, or if you have a jar of applesauce, just use that. And the same goes even if you're using pears and you want to kind of skip that step. You can use applesauce, and then in that case, you might just reduce the amount of chopped pears down to like maybe two, because it's like a third, right, of your total pears. So you just use 2, which would go in the batter and on top, and then you'd have if you just have a jar of applesauce laying around and you want to use it up, this could be a good spot for it. And it will do that same thing. And what an applesauce or a pear sauce or fruit puree does in baking, a lot of people who are dairy-free use fruit purees in place of butter in baking, and it really helps with keeping things moist and together, and it does some of those things that butter does in baked goods really well. And so here we're using it kind of to cut the butter a little bit, but also to impart more pear flavor in the batter. Yes, another question.
Have you ever tried pear brandy in the pear puree?
The question is, have I ever tried pear brandy in the pear puree? And no, I have not, but that I'm sure would be really nice. A little splash of pear brandy in there to get things moving, and that would give a really good flavor as well, and break down those pears nicely. So good idea. Yes, another question.
Somebody would like to know the difference. Could they use castor sugar? Is that the same as ordinary sugar?
Yes. The question is castor sugar, and castor sugar is the same as granulated sugar. I think powdered sugar. Where is that powdered sugar? I'm confused now, but we can Google it up real quick. But I believe castor sugar is the same as granulated sugar. We have our Google expert Googling. Yeah. Yes. So yeah, castor sugar and granulated sugar.
It's finer.
It's a little finer, and that's the difference. So that's good to know. Yeah. So you could, if you have, any sort of those somewhat granulated sugar varieties will work in this. All right. Well, I think that about wraps up. I'm going to finish this piece of cake, I think, and then think about dinner. And I hope you enjoyed this cooking demonstration, and maybe you cooked along, and I think you'll really love this cake, and I hope everyone tries it. Great recipe. And as I mentioned before, all these recipes, they can be found at our basicsmarket.com. And we have more cooking demonstrations and classes and skill videos on there as well. And then we have more classes coming up. Next week, the pierogi class. And then into next month, we have chocolate bark and truffles towards Valentine's Day. And then a soup and bread class. And then some chilaquiles and homemade corn tortillas that you'll utilize in that dish. So please keep coming back. Check out our website. There's lots of good stuff on there, and shop at the Basics Market. I find all these some of these beautiful ingredients that I used here tonight: the Gwendolyn's eggs and the Lulabelle's butter, as well as many other ingredients and foods which we make locally here in the Willamette Valley. Thanks so much. I really enjoyed myself, and look forward to seeing you again. Happy cooking.